Iran continues with military drills and efforts to rebuild its military capabilities, having learned nothing from the 12-day war in June. The Americans are worried about the Iranian threat and are watching closely while ordinary Iranian people are suffering amidst harsh winter weather. Half of Iran's citizens are living in poverty, the air is filthy, and there is no water in the taps, but the regime is spending all its money on missile tests. So, are we heading for another Iranian attack on Israel? We'll take a closer look. Another drain on Iran's finances this week is the Lebanese Shiite terrorist militia Hezbollah, which is demanding another $2 billion for the reconstruction of the areas damaged in last year's war with Israel. But this time, the Ayatollahs are saying no, it's too much, and we'll have more details about that as well. Hezbollah is also struggling to confront the Lebanese National Army, which is surprising everyone by seizing shipments of weapons that are being smuggled to the terrorist group. Meanwhile, the IDF continues to hit Hezbollah operatives in southern Lebanon one by one. But while all the eyes are on Lebanon and Tehran, there are also dangerous developments in Gaza as Hamas continues to stall on returning the remains of the slain hostage Ran Gaveli and steadily rebuilding its capabilities. Meanwhile, IDF soldiers are frustrated, saying that without approval from the United States, you can't do anything. However, there is another rising threat in the Middle East, and it's also the old threat from ISIS. The resurgence of this group must be crushed, and that's something that President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu fully agree on. Joint operations between the American military and the IDF against ISIS in Syria are ongoing and already showing results. We'll also talk today about the AI video driving the Arab world crazy, a selfie of IDF spokesperson Avichai Aderi with slain Hamas leaders, including Yahya Sinwar. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. Before we dive into the details, let's go over the headlines of the last 24 hours. Iran continues with military drills and efforts to rebuild its military capabilities after Operation Rising Lion, especially in the field of ballistic missiles. Israeli and American intelligence officials are following the developments and preparing accordingly for the advancing threat from Tehran. U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee said on Monday that Tehran must give up its nuclear program because they threaten us and Europe as well. He added a warning that it is possible that Iran did not understand the message after the 12-day war. Meanwhile, in the American administration, they are closely monitoring Iran's ballistic drills ahead of the Trump-Netanyahu meeting, in which the Prime Minister is expected to ask for a green light to strike Iran once more. In a related story, while the Iranian people are starving and the economy of the Islamic Republic is in ruins, the Ayatollah regime continues to spend all its money on ballistic missiles and arming its proxies in Lebanon and in Yemen. This week, Hezbollah demanded around $2 billion for reconstruction, but this time, Iran is drawing the line, saying it simply cannot afford it. Meanwhile, the IDF attacks Hezbollah terrorists again and again in southern Lebanon and is in a heightened stage of preparations for a ground attack to push Hezbollah away from the border once more. The reason this is very necessary is because Hezbollah keeps trying to prepare for another attack against Israel, and this week a cache of shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles was seized in eastern Syria as it was on its way to Hezbollah agents. Also this week, a report by the intelligence blog IntelliTimes gave details of Hezbollah's naval unit 1,200, which is operated under a cloak of security and civilian cover, using a civilian maritime institute in Lebanon to train its operatives. The unit operates with direct funding and management by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Quds units as part of the strategic efforts to build an offensive maritime arm for Hezbollah, and we will bring you all the details about this mysterious unit later in this report. But while everyone is watching the action in Lebanon and in Iran, there are also some dangerous developments in the Gaza Strip. Hamas terrorists who survived the long war against the IDF are reorganizing in areas beyond the yellow line, communicating by means that are hard to detect and not concentrating in one headquarters that can be struck, but rather in wide areas in different tunnels. The governmental mechanisms are also being reactivated, and the clans hardly dare to challenge the rule of the terrorist organization. This is a flashing red warning light right under Israel's nose. And meanwhile, IDF soldiers serving on the yellow line talk about dozens of Hamas violations along the border as it reorganizes, lays explosives, and rebuilds infrastructure, but despite definite identification of these threats, they are not authorized to open fire. In a related story, after the IDF and the Israeli intelligence passed precise information about the location of the remains of the fallen hostage Ran Gaveli to the mediators, Hamas has still not interrogated the Islamic Jihad terrorists who are believed to know where the remains are located. Israel knew where these terrorists were during the war, but refrained from hitting them to avoid losing the precious information that they held. Now, the assessment is that the remains of Gaveli are being held somewhere in the eastern part of the Gaza area. In the northern arena, the growing threat of ISIS in Syria is concerning both the United States President and also Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and this subject is sure to be at the top of the list of things that will be discussed later at their upcoming meeting in Florida. The United States military struck ISIS strongholds in Idlib this week, and in parallel, IDF forces operated in the Syrian Golan Heights against a suspect in territory activity. Speaking of ISIS, new information has surfaced about the terrorists who carried out the attack on the Bondi beach in Australia, the father-son team of Sajid and Nabid Akram. Apparently, the two conducted training sessions in a secluded area in October, and then also filmed a video in which they recited a verse from the Quran alongside an ISIS flag and condemned the acts of the Zionists. 2 days before the attack, they also conducted a preliminary reconnaissance at the massacre scene and examined the bridge from which they opened fire after throwing 4 improvised explosive devices which did not explode. Finally, in footage that was circulated in the last 24 hours on networks across the Arab world and prepared with artificial intelligence, the IDF spokesperson in Arabic is seen taking selfies with several senior terrorist leaders who were eliminated in the past 2 years. Obviously, this was meant to be a joke, but many people are not laughing. The commander's reactions did not disappoint, and this is quickly becoming the video of the year. So we have a lot to talk about today, but let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report with the whole truth about what's happening in Israel on day 808 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are operating under the control of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we start, don't forget to share and follow us. It's really important so we can keep reporting the truth about what's happening in Israel. This report is partnered by Leket Israel, and we'll share more about this amazing organization later on in this report. And now, we're beginning today's report with a look at the recent developments in Iran. In the shadow of the recent reports that Tehran is producing ballistic missiles at a fast pace and in large quantities, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Bagahi claimed on Monday that the goal of these missiles is self-defense and deterrence against any kind of attack, and that their production is not open to negotiation. Against the backdrop of these and other militant statements coming out of Tehran, about half a year after the exchange of blows in Operation Rising Lion, Israeli officials are considering the possibility of another military strike on Iran's ballistic missile production complexes. The American news portal NBC reported recently that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will present options for such a strike to United States President Donald Trump during their upcoming meeting in Florida. These reports follow warnings by regional officials quoted last month in the New York Times that another war between Israel and Iran is only a matter of time. According to the NBC report, Iran's ballistic missile production could reach up to about 3,000 missiles per year if there is no change in the situation. However, the same report added that in the 12-day war between Israel, Iran, and also the United States, Israel destroyed the production capacity for the solid fuel needed for these missiles, so the new production is centered around liquid-fueled missiles. This is important because missiles with solid fuel can be stored in safe locations and brought out to be fired in a very short period of time, whereas liquid fuel must be stored separately from the missiles and loaded just before they are fired in a process which lasts just over an hour. In that hour, these missiles and the fueling mechanisms are highly vulnerable to attacks, and that is why everyone would rather have solid-fueled missiles rather than liquid-fueled ones. But the Iranians have no choice, and now the production facilities that they are rebuilding are centered around producing liquid-fueled missiles, and that means to be another threat against Israel. So the officials who provided this information to NBC also noted that the activity includes movements and coordination that deviates from normal patterns, including movements of Iranian units of UAV missiles and air defensive systems. They said that the developments may be related to military exercises, but added that the scope and the level of coordination drew special attention. On the news site Axios, it was also reported overnight that the IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir informed on Saturday the commander of the U.S. Central Command, Admiral Brad Cooper, that the missile exercise launched by Iran's Revolutionary Guards in recent days could be covered for a surprise attack on Israel. They can use this to disguise their attacks. So the waves of leaks and the briefings coming out of Israel in recent days about rising tensions with Iran and reasons why a new round against Tehran should be initiated is expected to intensify in the coming days until Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's meeting with US President Donald Trump in Florida. To explain, the absence of any foreign enforcement mechanism or any political arrangement that would limit the Iranians, the IRGC began rehabilitating their missile array immediately following the end of the 12-day war in June. Advanced missile production, know-how, and a lot of money to finance the production were also transferred non-stop in recent months to Iran's branches from Yemen to Lebanon. IDF military intelligence assesses that if the trend will continue, we will enter another round with the Iranians, but he recommended a threshold line for another initiative which cannot be detailed. And with all of that in mind, Israeli security officials estimate that Iran still has no interests in taking revenge on Israel for its humiliating defeat in the 12-day war until it proves its capabilities, draws lessons from its military failures in the summer, strengthens its intelligence collection, and arms Hezbollah and the Houthis even more. In this aspect, it seems that the regime's survival instincts is stronger than its revenge instinct. But a mistaken impression from the preparations in Israel could indeed cause the Iranians to act first, this time in launching a preemptive strike which would give the United States legitimacy to again provide political support and military aid, even if defensive, as dozens of heavy missiles will be fired at Israel every single day. The IDF High Command recently reminded that the defense establishment also has many lessons to draw from the campaign against Iran, which came in the late stage of a long, demanding, multi-front war that the IDF has been drawn into since October 7th. A senior IDF official explained that during the war, Israel used a range of boutique capabilities, unprecedented deceptions, special weapons, classified technologies, and methods that we kept for 2 decades in order to use only against the Iranians in the 3rd cycle. Now, all those advantages that were being saved for just the right time have been used up. So in the next round, if there is one, something else will need to be done. Now, I need to make a comment right here about another factor in all of this, and that's the long-suffering ordinary people of Iran, who are under enormous pressure and have a terrible quality of life. Things have gotten even more difficult for them recently after last September. France, Germany, and Britain reactivated the snapback return of international sanctions on the Islamic Republic. It can be estimated that about half of Iran's population is actually living below the real poverty line, and even many who are living above it are suffering amidst the ongoing turmoil, which includes environmental disasters, wicked winter weathers, and some of the worst air pollution in the entire world. According to research economic assessments, the continued rise in prices is at a fast pace, faster than the wages, and it's expected to bring about an accelerated erosion of the middle class and to expand even further the circle of families that are struggling to provide basic living needs. Added to the economic stress is also a severe water crisis, which led to widespread power outages and caused senior government officials to consider alternative housing solutions for Tehran residents. And amidst all of this, U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee was interviewed on Monday at a conference hosted by the Institute for National Security Studies, a think tank in Tel Aviv. During his interview, Ambassador Huckabee addressed several burning security and political issues related to Iran, to Syria, and to the Gaza Strip. Regarding Iran, he said, apparently they did not understand the full message of the American bombers that struck in Fordo, and it seems that they are trying to dig deeper. Huckabee was also asked about the possibility of a renewed strike in Iran and replied that President Donald Trump has said again and again that Iran will never enrich uranium and will not have a nuclear weapon. He said it long before this war started, and he did not change the message after it. I don't know if Iran took him seriously until that night that the B-2 bombers flew to Fordo. Apparently, they didn't get the full message because it seems like they're trying to rebuild and find a new way to dig the hole deeper, to secure it more. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you every report on the developments regarding the Iranian threat. So please keep spreading the truth, share, follow us, and most importantly, do not forget to press on the subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, I want to talk to you for just a moment about our partner for today's report. Naomi was only 6 years old when she learned the terrifying pain of starvation in a Nazi ghetto. She survived the war, but today, in Israel, she and thousands of other Holocaust survivors face heartbreaking reality. The threat of hunger has returned. For these survivors, proper nutrition is a matter of life and death. Their bodies, already scarred by the trauma of their youth, are incredibly fragile. A lack of fresh, healthy food weakens their bodies and reawakens the psychological terror of the past. When a survivor cannot afford to put food on the table, they retreat in shame. They sit alone in empty apartments, cut off from the community that they desperately need. Hunger silences their homes. But you have the power to break the silence. Lekek Israel, the National Food Bank, is the shield protecting them from this indignity. They rescue and deliver fresh, nutrient-rich produce directly to survivors and to shop kitchens that serve them. We're on a mission to be a blessing to the people of Israel. As Rachel, a survivor in a care home, said when she saw the Lekek Israel trucks arrive, they unload a bounty. It warms the heart to know that they exist. Lekek could not protect them from the horrors of the Holocaust, but as followers of Yeshua, Jesus, we can protect them from the ravages of malnutrition and loneliness right now. So be their shield, restore their health and their dignity, strengthen these survivors in their final years. Visit nourishasurvivor.org today. Again, that's nourishasurvivor.org today and lend a hand. Now, we're getting back into the news as all eyes are fixed on a strike that may again happen on Iran's nuclear and missile sites. But in Gaza, Hamas continues to rebuild its military and civilian capabilities. This is happening while the political and the security leadership in Israel focuses on planning the next blows in Lebanon and formulating a strategic response against Tehran. And beneath the surface in the Gaza Strip, a warring process is taking place. Hamas is exploiting the relative quiet in certain sectors of the Gaza Strip in order to rebuild its military and governing capabilities and make clear that it is far from a final defeat. A central focal point of the renewed buildup is located in the central camps area and the territory west of the Yellow Line. According to assessments, in these areas, there are thousands of active terrorists, including a command and operational tier of veteran terrorists with years of operational experience. These are not new recruits, but rather the hardcore that survived the intense stages of the war and maintains a command hierarchy. After the IDF managed to eliminate Hamas's senior leadership in the central camps of Nuseirat, El-Burij, and El-Maghazi, the field echelon remained relatively intact, including veteran company and platoon commanders. These are terrorists with 10 and 15 years of experience who know very well the area, every alley and every tunnel shaft. They run a decentralized command structure. There is one main headquarters that can be hit, but rather there is a network of independent terror cells communicating via traditional means that are very hard to detect. Furthermore, in the terror infrastructure in this area west of the Yellow Line and mainly in the center of the Gaza Strip, there are apparently dozens of kilometers of tunnels, some defined as strategic, enabling senior figures to move and transport other terrorist squads. In these tunnels, many weapons are also stored, mainly small arms like rifles, machine guns, and anti-tank launchers of RPG type, which is the most effective weapon of the Gaza terrorist organization in guerrilla warfare in a built-up terrain. But despite all their losses, after more than 2 years of war, the organization is showing flexibility and finding alternatives. They are using improvised laths set up inside civilian buildings and in tunnels west of the Yellow Line. They managed to produce RPG rounds and explosive charges. Even though the production is far from the standard they had in the past, it provides the organization and the fighters with combat oxygen that will allow them to continue and harm IDF forces that are operating in the area if the fighting resumes. Also, the assessment is that even within what is considered the Yellow Line areas under Israeli security control, there exist pockets of terror and tunnels that were not located or destroyed, where many weapons are hidden and also food for prolonged stay. However, the most troubling development concerns Hamas's civil governing capabilities. West of the Yellow Line, Hamas managed to rebuild almost fully its civilian government, including policing mechanisms, price supervisions, and aid distribution, and taxes on the population, on the aid that Israel is providing them through our border crossings by the international community. The bottom line is that Hamas is still more than just another terrorist organization. They are under heavy pressure, but very far from being eliminated as a body that controls the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip with military capabilities. Well, according to foreign publications, Israel is debating whether to expand the campaign against Iran. Hamas continues to rebuild itself as a deadly guerrilla force and as the sole governing actor in the Gaza Strip. If this trend continues, we may find that the day after the war that is coming soon against Hezbollah in the north, we will be required to conduct another broad and intensive campaign inside the Gaza Strip, this time against an enemy that learned, rebuilt, and dug again. In a related story, senior officials in the defense establishment believe that Hamas can return the remains of the fallen hostage Ran Gaveli within a few days if it wants to do so. However, the organization has not yet interrogated the terrorists who know Gaveli's location, indicating foot dragging as reported by Doron Kadosh on the IDF radio in Israel. Israel passed a list of names of several Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists who know where Gaveli was buried to Hamas through the mediators. The Israeli message was, if Hamas interrogates these terrorists, they will be able to reach the precise point and location where they can find Gaveli. However, on Monday morning, it was reported on the army radio of the IDF in the news portal that Hamas has not yet interrogated these terrorists and therefore still does not have the information that would allow locating the hostage's body. This indicates Hamas is dragging its feet as it is not doing enough to return Gaveli to Israel as part of the agreement in Phase A. It is also becoming known that this week Israel refrained during the war from eliminating the small group of terrorists in order to avoid a situation in which they take the information with them to the grave, and the chances of returning Gaveli would be lost. As reported in the past, similar steps were also taken regarding terrorists who knew where Lieutenant Hadar Goldin was located and where his body was held, whom Israel intentionally refrained from terminating. The assessment is now that Gaveli's remains were buried in the area of eastern Gaza City, in the Sajaya neighborhood or the Zaytun neighborhood. In the meantime, Hamas shows no signs of planning to disarm, even symbolically in front of the cameras, while the fact that the overwhelming majority of the hostages, and especially the living ones, are already home in Israel lowered heavy pressure of both sides to compromise and to move towards a Gaza future without Hamas. For that matter, Israeli security officials believe that senior figures of the terrorist organization are operating as wanted men and managing Hamas from the tunnels, while more junior ranks do operate above ground, but under civilian cover and on a more internal mission. Every week, more and more Hamas checkpoints are added across the wide territories under its control, from Jabalia to parts of Rafah. Hamas police patrol daily, and they display governments and more departments in Gaza municipalities return to operate despite the enormous damage on the infrastructure that was left behind by this war. Hamas also began to funnel large sums of money, tens of hundreds of thousands of shekels every single day, into its recovery treasury, thanks to the humanitarian aid of the United Nations and UNRWA that cooperates with Hamas, aid that Israel allows to enter the Gaza Strip daily, totaling 4,200 trucks per week, which is between 600 and 800 every single day, some already from the private sector. These are goods and food products of all kinds which Hamas exploits the private trade in order to tax it and thus collect money from the public. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you the full truth of what's happening here in Israel just before we move on to Lebanon. So stay tuned and make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. This week, the intelligence blog IntelliTimes published details about a secret Hezbollah naval unit following the interrogation of Imad Amhazi, a naval officer in the organization who was arrested in northern Lebanon in an operation by the Shayetet 13 commando units of the IDF and then brought to Israel. So according to the investigation, the organization's external naval activity is conducted under Operations Unit 1200. The unit operates under civilian cover, funded and managed by Iran's Quds forces, and its goal is to rebuild an offensive and defensive naval force. Its parent unit is Unit 7900, the coastal missile unit, which today is capable of striking targets at ranges of hundreds of kilometers, including gas rigs and shipping lanes. Iran provides the unit with technological support and training for radar operations and identification systems. This Hezbollah military unit shamelessly uses the Lebanese Civilian Maritime Institute, Marsteh, to train operatives. Amhaz, who joined the organization in 2007 after training in Iran and served as a radar operator, studied at the institute as a student alongside additional operatives, exploiting access and civilian equipment to plan military activities. So according to the report, the naval project was managed under direct instructions of the organization's former Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, but additional command figures included Faoud Shukar, the Chief of Staff who was eliminated in July 2024, and also Ibrahim Kabasi, the head of the missile array, who was eliminated in September 2024. The central figure who remains alive and was identified as directly responsible for the secret naval portfolio is Ali Abdel El Hassan Nur El-Din, Shukar's son-in-law. The investigation points to cooperation between the naval unit and additional units in the organization, including Unit 8030 of the IRGC Quds Force Weapons Development Team, Unit 4400, which is in charge of smuggling, and Unit 910, which handles external operations. It also emerges that Hezbollah is trying to adopt a container warfare model, which enables the use of civilian merchant fleet for smuggling needs, concealment, and even a surprise launch of coastal missiles, UAVs, and unmanned aerial vessels for maritime containers. In a related story, reports emerged this week that in recent months, the Hezbollah's leadership asked Iran to double the annual financial assistance to the organization and set it at about $2 billion, arguing that the sums being transferred are not sufficient to rehabilitate the organization after this war. However, the Revolutionary Guards and the Quds Force rejected the demand, and the final agreement stood on transferring an amount of close to $1 billion as the Iranians wanted. This Iranian money continues to flow as usual as the organization's operatives receive full salaries, recruitment and training continues, and extensive activities are recorded to acquire weapons mainly via the air. All of this while Iran's population is suffering from shortages of the most basic necessities of life, while enduring harsh winter weather, catastrophically poor air quality, and a drought that is making basic existence impossible in several cities. Hezbollah officials say that they're also suffering after Israel destroyed and captured enormous stocks of their weapons and equipment that were built up over 2 decades, along with bunkers, tunnels, and everything else that Hezbollah needs in order to continue planning attacks against the Jewish state. So I must say, I'm feeling more sympathy every single day for the people of Iran, and my disgust with their leaders and the leadership of Hezbollah is growing every day at about the same rate. What do you think about all of this? Let me know in the comments section. And now, we're shifting our focus to the problems that are presented by ISIS in Syria. But before we move to that story, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring all the truth about what's happening in Israel and in this region. So help us by subscribing, by sharing this video, and by leaving a comment. Now, I was born in Israel and I've lived my whole life here. But in the last few days, I'm seeing things that I've never imagined. The United States military struck ISIS strongholds in Idlib in Syria as part of a response to the incident a few weeks ago in which an ISIS ambush on a US Army patrol in eastern Syria led to the fatality of 2 soldiers and a civilian interpreter who was with these forces. In parallel to the American action, the IDF forces of the Golan Division operated in various areas in the southern Golan, Syria. The IDF spokesperson office announced that over the weekend, forces of Battalion 52, under the command of the Golan Brigade 474, completed a night operation in the Rafid area in southern Syria, in which they arrested a suspect involved in terror activity was operated by ISIS. The operation was completed together with the field investigators of Unit 504, and the suspect was transferred for interrogation on Israeli territory. Officials in both Israel and the United States are concerned, as in recent days the rule of Syria's interim president Abu Muhammad al-Julani is facing a big test. Several cracks have opened in his governance inside Damascus and in other areas all across Syria. Among his people, there are those that are challenging many of his recent moves, especially his closeness to the West and his pragmatic approach to relations with Israel and with moderate Gulf states. ISIS is trying to take advantage of this to grow its own influence, especially in the areas south of Damascus. Right now, there is close coordination between Israel and the United States on the issue of military moves in this region. Both countries understand that al-Julani needs to be strengthened against threats that could undermine his rule, but also undermine regional stability and once again strengthen the so-called resistance axis. And speaking of the resistance axis, and circling back to Lebanon, since the weekend, 4 Hezbollah terrorists were eliminated in southern Lebanon. The latest activity was intended first and foremost to create an enforcement sequence and create deterrence. The issue of more intense fighting in Lebanon can be complex for the Americans, but it can also be complex due to the much simpler issues. To manage intense fighting, better weather is preferred without storms and cloud cover. This is to create a combat sequence while exploiting the IDF's advantage, which includes an observation array, air force, and precise fire. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you the whole truth about what's happening in the Middle East. And now, it affects Israel, it affects the West, it affects the United States, Europe, Australia, and other places around the world. So make sure to give us a like, a share, and subscribe to TBN Israel. And now, we also have a story today about something that was probably meant as a joke, but many people all over the Middle East are not amused. A video, obviously fake and created by AI, has been widely spread and viewed on social media all over the world this week. In the video, IDF Arabic spokesperson Colonel Avichai Aderi is shown wearing a black vest and standing in a graveyard, taking selfies on his phone with several terrorist leaders who have been eliminated over the past 2 years of this war. In the video, the slain terrorist leaders are wearing a badge with the word "eliminated" in Arabic. The terrorist leaders featured in this video include senior Hamas figure Yahya Sinwar, Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, the commander of Hamas's military wing Muhammad Def, senior Hamas figure Ismail Haniyeh, the Houthis chief of staff Muhammad El Rumari, senior Hamas figure Raed Said, and Hezbollah's chief of staff Ali Tabtabi. The video, which is not connected to a post by Aderi himself, but rather was first published on Sunday evening by the exiled Iraqi journalist Sufai El-Samari, who is identified with the anti-Iranian camp, has been shared and viewed millions of times in just the first 24 hours of its existence. Many in the Middle East are not amused if the comments on this video are any kind of indication. Have you seen the video? If so, what do you think about it? Let me know in the comments section. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development on this issue, so keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And now, we're switching our focus to Australia and to new details about the terrorists who carried out the massacre at Bondi Beach last week, as indictment documents published in Australia revealed for the first time a full picture of the preparations for the Hanukkah massacre and the depth that was put into planning this event by the Sajjad and the Nabid Karim, family members, the terrorists who were responsible for this attack. So, according to the documents, the father and the son on October went to a secluded area in the New South Wales where they filmed themselves training with the hunting rifles, the shotgun that they planned to use in the attack, as well as also they practiced tactical movements. That month, they also filmed a propaganda video in which they posed with an ISIS flag and 4 rifles while Nabid recites a verse from the Quran, and afterwards the two speak in English and present their extremist views, condemn the actions of the Zionists, and formulate the religious political justification for this attack. In November, the two traveled to the Philippines, stayed in a cheap hotel in the city of Davao, but barely left the room, and it is still unclear what they did there. After they returned to Australia on December 12, they conducted an intelligence tour at Bondi Beach, walking on the bridge from which they later fired into the crowd at the Hanukkah party and generally examined the whole surrounding area. On the day of the attack, December 14, they were documented leaving an Airbnb apartment in the Sydney suburbs with the rifles hidden under blankets in their car. According to the incident, before they opened fire, they threw 4 improvised explosive devices at the crowd that did not explode but were defined as functional and dangerous. Only afterwards did they begin firing from 3 rifles at the crowd. Sajid Akram was eliminated at the scene. His son, Nabid, who was wounded and arrested, is charged with 59 terror counts, including 15 murders and 40 attempted murders. Elsewhere, a short film was surfacing that's appearing to show an anti-Semitic attack at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris last month. In the film, taken by the attacker, a British man approached two Haredi Jewish children, minding their own business playing video games while they wait for their flight. The British man filmed himself verbally assaulting these children, threatening to rip the kippah of a 7-year-old child and calling him a pig. This evil person then posted this video, apparently proud of himself, under the hashtag Free Palestine. This is just one more example of a rising tide of anti-Semitism happening all over the world. The video was exposed in the last few days on the X account Harav Shelma, which identified the attacker as a resident of East London and called on France and Britain to prosecute him. This case shows that Jews are attacked today not only at huge rallies, but also at airports, on the streets of Europe's cities, and on social media networks, and we cannot keep ignoring it. We need to respond, document, and demand enforcement. And here at TBN Israel, we want to call on you to keep spreading the truth. Share this content with as many people as possible. Give a click to the subscribe button. Most importantly, pray. This is a spiritual war. We need your help in praying for the situation. Prayers work. I've seen it throughout this war multiple times. Let's pray. Let's pray for wisdom to our leaders. Let's pray for our leaders to start loving on the Jewish people. God can change their hearts. Let's pray for the world to wake up to this danger. Let's keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.